Hi, everybody. Here we are in the second week of this leadership class. And this week, I want to give you a lecture. Really, you can see from the slides, I have taken this from some resources offered by the publisher from Northhouse's book, where he talks about the skills approach. And you have, as part of your activities, done this skills inventory. At least you are assigned to do the skills inventory. And really, it's designed as a self-evaluation to understand your own leadership skills. And specifically, it's designed to understand your level of technical skill, your level of human skill, and your level of conceptual skill, which we're going to talk about in this lecture. So just really briefly, and I'm just going to take a few minutes with this. The chapter on the skills approach talks again about some research that Northhouse successfully collates here for you and puts together in the book. And again, that is really what I like about this book. He takes a lot of the really good academic research and he describes how it's been influential in the study of leadership. So we're going to talk really briefly about these. And then at the end of this, where his outline says, how does the skills approach work? I have some questions to pose. They're really rhetorical questions. But things we should think about. So Katz, way back in 1955, before most of us were born, I think, came up with this three-skill approach. He said that in his research, he had discovered really that leaders have some degree of three different skills: technical skills, human skills, or conceptual skills, as he called these skills. And all leaders had these, but in varying degrees. And so um, you see here this little bar graph is broken up into top management, middle management, and supervisory management. And again here, there might be a little bit of a flaw in the thinking here, because notice that the implication is that only management has leadership skills. So really we're talking about positional leadership. We're saying that based on a person's position, they must have some level of leadership, which I would argue is probably true, but it also slightly obviates the idea that people who aren't in management within an organization also can have leadership skills, and they can have these basic skills that Katz calls basic administrative skills. But you see here that what he finds in his research is that top management have higher levels of human conceptual skills, and supervisory, so what we would call first level supervisors, might have higher levels of technical skill. And so this is kind of intuitive, and he's not just theorizing this, he's actually found this from his research, right? So what are these things, these skills: technical, human, and conceptual skill? So technical skill is pretty much just what it sounds like, right? You're good at a particular technical job. You have a set of competencies, and you're able to apply them to a problem at hand. And typically we would think of this as hands-on ability. And so often we're talking about a working supervisor. So a great example, is a foreman at a construction job site. A foreman is really a worker who has done those construction processes and understands them, but that foreman is also supposed to direct the task day to day of a group of workers. So this foreman would have a high level of technical skills, and so it's important, according to Katz, at this level of management. And then there's human skills. People having knowledge about people and being able to work with them. Now, Katz found that upper levels of management had higher levels of human skill. I think I would argue that human skills are probably important at all levels of the organization. Agreeing with him there, because this comes from more than just your work experiences, right? This can come from your family background, the things you've been involved with in school as a, as a high school student or middle school student. Um, it's actually developing over time a perspective about yourself and a perspective about others and being able to motivate others to work together. So it's understanding basically how humans operate and how they view you and how you view them. So, you would argue that for a leader, this is important for most of us. And then there's conceptual skill. And uh, this really kind of relates to strategic planning. If you go back to thinking about strategic planning, remember when we talked about strategic planning and I said my favorite strategic planning diagram from that Bryson book is that three-part one, that triangle that says, this is where the organization is, this is where we want to go, and this is how we're going to get there. You're shaping a concept of what needs to be done now and in the future. And you're thinking through that, excuse me, you're thinking through that with hypothetical notions. And so this is central to planning in an organization, being able to conceptualize where we're going. And it is true. I think we can attest to this, that at the top levels of management in an organization, we're looking for someone who leads with a vision, aren't we? We're looking for someone who knows where the organization wants to go and can lead us in that direction. We're really not looking for a foreman to be the head of the organization. We're really not looking for that person who can direct our day-to-day tasks. And in fact, often we would complain if the chair of the organization or the CEO is coming down and directing our day-to-day tasks. We would accuse that person of micromanagement, not real leadership. So right here, there's a link here, and if you can't view this on the video edition of this presentation, it does link on the PowerPoint version, but otherwise you can just copy this link and paste it, and you should be able to watch this YouTube presentation. This happens to be a trailer for a movie that was produced in 2010 called The Social Network, and it's about Facebook. It's about Mark Zuckerberg. So what I'd like you to do at this point in the lecture is go ahead and either click this link if that works, or copy the link and find it on Facebook and watch it for just a couple of minutes. Okay, so before I go to this slide, what did you think of Mark Zuckerberg? The movie, actually, The Social Network, if you saw it, and probably some of you did, it's not really flattering to Mark Zuckerberg as a person. But what I want to highlight is this idea of what is Mark Zuckerberg's leadership ability even as a young person. He's a student at Harvard in 2003. So he's relatively young when he comes up with Facebook. He certainly had the technical skills, didn't he? I mean, he had the technical skills to the point of irritation and obnoxiousness, according to the movie. But, I would argue that he had conceptual skills. He saw what he wanted this thing to be, something that really nobody had really done. What this social network Facebook could become. He saw that conceptually, and also he had human skills. Even though what the movie portrays is a guy with very low human skills. In fact, he understands some things about humans and how they operate. And he says, the reasons why he created Facebook was so that people could get together, typical college students. So I would argue that he had a lot of leadership abilities, a lot of leadership skills that weren't appreciated necessarily. And now Mark Zuckerberg is a billionaire. So it's kind of hard to argue with his success, but it's an interesting take on leadership. Okay, so let's move on more to this skills model perspective. And this really is based on competencies. And so here we're moving into some things that are really interesting to me, because when I say that a person has a competency, when we say that someone is competent in something, then that implies that we can necessarily test them on that. And competency-based education is a growing thing in higher education. In other words, you can avoid all this classwork if you can just take a test that demonstrates your competencies. Well, right. And that also begs the question of how is the instrument designed? How is the test instrument designed to test your competencies in any particular thing? So what are these competencies? They're individual attributes, leadership outcomes, career experiences, and environmental influences. Okay, so look at this chart. So basically what this is saying is a person starts with individual attributes, moves on to competencies, and these produce over here leadership outcomes. Okay, so the individual attributes there's 4 of them, and we're going to go through these: the general cognitive ability, the crystallized cognitive ability, motivation, and personality. If successful, these lead to these competencies of problem-solving skills, social judgment skills, and knowledge, with effective outcomes of, you're solving the problems and you're performing. So let's go through these one by one. Okay, so individual attributes. They said, remember, there's 4 of them. Okay, so what is your general cognitive ability? Well, this is what we teach you in school, right? In all your K-12 education, in college, we're giving you this. We're giving you the ability for perceptual processing. You understand math, you understand how sentences are put together. You're given the ability, I shouldn't say you're given, you're actually learning and reinforcing yourself these abilities, to process information. Someone gives you information and you're able to process it and reason through it, right? And most importantly, I would say, is this cognitive ability to remember things, right? Because in any job situation, it helps that if you don't have to come to work every day and start the day over again and get trained, like, Groundhog Day or something, you actually understand what's happening. That's another interesting movie. If you watch Groundhog Day with Bill Murray, he does have memory, even though everybody else doesn't remember what's happening on that day. He does, and he learns from it. So then there's this crystallized cognitive ability, which is, you're taking all these things you learn in school and they're crystallizing in your mind, literally. And this is an intellectual ability that you acquire over time, which leads to motivation, right? And there are 3 aspects of motivation: willingness, dominance, and social good, right? No one can teach you to be motivated. I can't teach you to be motivated. You can't teach me to be motivated. We have to motivate ourselves. And then there's personality. And I've made this argument for years, really, when I was in the military, that you can have a highly skilled intellectual person, but without personality, they're missing a big chunk of the individual attributes. Basically, it's personality that makes followers want to follow that leader. Okay, and then the second block in the first slide I showed was these competencies and skills, right, of problem solving, social judgment, and knowledge. So problem solving is just what it sounds like, the creative ability to solve new problems. This is another thing we do teach kids in school, right? When kids are toddlers, we give them puzzles to do to learn how to problem solve. So this is a very important competency just in human social existence. And then there's social judgment, what some people might call emotional intelligence, right? That is the capacity to understand people and the situation that those people are in and that you're in with them. And being able to adapt yourself emotionally and with the things you say and the things you do, your body language, actually being able to have the judgment to work with people. That is a skill. And then knowledge. So again, this competency is the accumulation of all information and mental structures to organize information, right? So, I mean, you would say somebody who's really good at the game Trivial Pursuit has a lot of knowledge. Absent some other skills, though, it's not always that helpful. And so the third block in that diagram I showed was outcomes. So outcomes is really what we measure in any organization, right? It doesn't matter to a lot of organizations that you have a whole group of people with all these leadership competencies, that you have all these people with all this knowledge and with all this social judgment, if they can't actually get outcomes. So in terms of outcomes, when we talk about problem solving, that means problem solved, really. What problems did you solve? Were you able to confront a problem in the organization and actually come up with a solution? Meaning you have performed. And so something we all dread working in organizations is, something like the annual performance review, right? People dread it because you sit down with your supervisor, she tells you everything you've been doing wrong or right. And in some organizations, it's a pretty gut-wrenching experience. But in fact, in most organizations, that is what you're being judged on. And so underlying all this, and this is the last point, you can see at the bottom of this chart are what links these things together are environmental influences throughout and career experiences. So I'm going to show you how this linkage works there at those wires at the bottom of career experience and environmental influences. So this is actually what we try to do with people in an organization. Now, I would also argue that we kind of live in a different economy now, right? We hear a lot about the gig economy, people doing little side gigs, driving for Uber or whatever. This kind of thing becomes very popular. And when a lot of this research was done, we lived in the corporate world. I was in the military 26 years, and I would argue that the military has operated like a corporation since the end of World War II, anyway. And in fact, it was designed to operate like a corporation. You can actually go back and read the documents from post-World War II that would indicate to you that the military was designed to operate like a big corporation in America. But in the corporate world, we actually try to develop people, right, in the organization because the expectation is they're going to grow with the organization. Now, how this works in the newer economy where we can expect people to work, 7, 8, 9 different careers in their lifetime, I'm not sure. I think they become a lot more involved in their own development. But we try to develop people so that they are offered challenging assignments, mentoring, appropriate training, and hands-on experience with novelty, with different things throughout their career so that they can grow in their career, right? And why do we do this? We do this because at the end of it all, we have created people who can become those higher level leaders because we believe these career experiences develop capacity in people to become higher level leaders. And so therefore they become more conceptual in their thinking. They move from the technical skills to the more conceptual skills, all the while picking up more and more human skills. And this is why we believe career experiences are important. But again, it's a question as to how this model fits in a different kind of economy. And so what are these environmental influences? Well, of course, this affects us all, right? And it's affecting us all today in our economy. Another argument that you hear a lot is, will robots take the place of workers? For example, in production. I mean, robots have taken the place of workers in a lot of kinds of production environments. There are a lot more robots in automobile plants. Now, there are still a lot of humans in automobile plants, but there are a lot of robots doing jobs that humans used to do, doing spot welds on the cars that's going by, putting different components on the car. So the environment affects us all. We live in an information age where we're all operating virtually. We are on those social networks that Mark Zuckerberg helped create. So there is an environment in which we live. And so what the point of leadership of this discussion within the context of leadership is that leaders have to be adaptable. I mean, I'm not sure that a high-level conceptual leader in today's environment, whether they're 65 years old or 70 years old or whatever, can say, well, you know what, I don't understand that technical stuff. I just have people who do that for me. I'm not convinced a leader can get away with that anymore. That's a question that we have to ask. You can ask it and figure out what you think about it. Okay, so what? So what? So here's the kind of rhetorical questions I said were at the end of this. And if you've gotten this far, then you can kind of start to answer these questions. I'm not going to answer them, but they're things to think about. Given that this approach argues that leadership is a skill, again, not a trait, right? We talked about leadership traits previously last week. It's not something somebody is born with. Can we teach people to lead? The second question is then, if these are skills, can we test whether people can lead? The third question is, if experience is required, remember we talked about career experiences, developing people, can young people lead? And so how does this operationalize itself in this new kind of economy? If experience is required to lead, can young people lead? Not only that, can people who switch careers all the time lead? And then finally, do we overrate or underrate so-called life skills? Life skills are a big deal, right? Lots of universities, not just the ones who advertise it, but lots of universities will, in fact, give you credit for life skills if you can demonstrate some competencies. Lots of universities will do that. They won't give you the whole degree based on that, but they'll give you a test to see if your life skills actually have given you competencies. But do we overrate that, or do we underrate it? I mean, I think that's a real question to consider. So that's the end of this mini lecture. It took me about 22 minutes, so I'm going to wrap it up here. Good luck with the reading. Again, I really like the Northhouse test. Do those assessments at the end of the chapters as you're assigned to do. They are very helpful and very eye-opening. I'm looking forward to your inputs. Thank you.